Morning, everyone. Welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, September 27th. Hasqualawin, pleased to look at Laska Holtmish Okmeo. We're privileged to be meeting during our work today on the traditional unceded territory of Squamish Nation. Motion to adopt the agenda moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. Most of you don't have your cameras on, Council, just so you know. Yeah. So first up, we have our library budget presentation. Hillary Bloom's here. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mayor and Council, and thank you for the opportunity to present our requests to you today. My name is Hillary Bloom, Director of Library Services, and unfortunately, our Library Board Chair, Molly, was unable to join me this morning. We didn't have our usual opportunity to provide you with a mid-year update this year as part of our annual report presentation back in June. So just ahead of our budget requests, I want to give a few highlights of 2022 to date. One of the main events of 2022 for the library was a large-scale interior renovation that took place right at the end of 2021 and into 2022, and we survived it. The library looks great, and the community loves it. The staff have more room to work and to collaborate. Some special highlights include a permanent holds pickup area with an exterior window for convenience, a central information desk to support our patron-focused service delivery model, an area for new and featured titles, and a more open and welcoming feel to the space. We also collaborated with the United Way, who made it possible for the addition of a bright, beautiful new mural on the back of the library next to our pickup window. It's really brightened up the once drab gray back part of the library and parking lot area. This was a fun community-led process with community input informing the design, and then a painting party for community members to paint the bottom 6 feet of the mural. And I think Mayor Elliott might recognize a few of her own brushstrokes on the final product. There's a picture of the mural if you haven't seen it yet. And also just a shot of our Holds pickup window that's just to the right of that mural. As far as public programming, we've offered a diverse range of public programming this year, including the resumption of some in-person events, both indoor and outdoor, as well as the continuation of a lot of our successful virtual programming, which also includes a lot of collaboration with the other Sea to Sky libraries. Just some highlights from there. The photo on the left is of a really successful bat walk that happened back in the summer, which then led to the development of some new lending items such as bat kits with these detectors that you can hook up to a phone to measure bat activity around you. Also just some pictures of, our virtual book club format for book clubs has really helped for extensive participation through the Sea to Sky. That title there, Genderqueer, is one that's been happening through September. Genderqueer happens to be the most challenged book in the US right now. So I like that we're participating and allowing access to discussion of the title. And then many collaborations, as I mentioned, outdoor and indoors. So we've had some successful plant walks, most recently with Suecia, but just a little smattering of the many things that have been happening. Children's programming, we resumed in-person summer reading club programming this year for the first time since 2019. And we had weekly Meet Your Community programs in our meeting room, which were opportunities for kids to meet various members of our community, like RCMP officers, forest firefighters, bear experts, garbage and recycling experts, as well as daily opportunities for kids to come in and connect with our summer staff, participate in contests and scavenger hunts and crafts, and update their reading records. It all felt quite normal this summer, which was a really great feeling. We've resumed in-person story times on various days of the week and times of the day, including evenings and weekends. We hosted a very cool augmented reality sandbox in our foyer for about 6 months. It has moved on to visit some other schools now, but that was a great highlight. And we've recently introduced a new resource for reading and listening to stories in other languages. It's a digital resource. So a smattering of photos of some entries from our bookmark contest on the top left, the sandbox on the bottom left, which was actually a community project that happened to involve a couple of district staff members on their own time. But it was great for all ages. And then on the right was a magician who came to visit. And then just a little poster about the online resource of kids' books in other languages. On the board front, we worked to establish a library provision with council earlier this year, and the board continued their good work with their two committees, the governance committee and the functional planning committees. And just on the board front, I wanted to acknowledge that David Gayton, our longtime trustee, will be wrapping up his 8th year on the board at the end of 2022. There's an 8-year time limit for library trustees. He spent many years by my side here presenting to council as our chair, and I just wanted to acknowledge that we appreciate his support and enthusiasm tremendously. We're going to figure out ways to keep him involved, but just not as a trustee. So getting back to my main reason for being here, I wanted to just give a bit of a refresh or recap about what we came to council with last fall. You may recall that through 2021, we had an organizational review undertaken, which happened to be done during COVID. And it was to look at our current staff complement and how to anticipate and plan for growth of the staff as we anticipate the growth of our library and our community. So through that review, it highlighted a few important things, which I did speak to last year as well, that we had been working within somewhat of a scarcity model. We're very good at showing how much we can do with not very much as a very lean operation, and the importance of adding redundancy to that to make sure we aren't too lean moving forward. And then as we've restored our services and we're now operating within a more patron-focused service delivery model. So as I mentioned, we have a very central service desk now. We're continuing to offer both in-person and virtual support. We have our in-library services, our takeout services, and our outreach services. So we need to, again, just ensure we aren't proving how much we can do with not enough. So last year when I first introduced this, I showed a plan to phase in the recommendations that had come from the review and to roll those out over the next several years. And so last year we rolled that out and presented and focused specifically at that time mostly on our 2022 budget requests. And then in June and July of this year, the library board looked at and approved the requests for the years to come, and which are a continuation of that phased plan. So today we are presenting what's to come for 2023 and beyond. So I just want to say before I get into the details here that these requests and their associated costs were built into and were included in the package that council contemplated last week when the district's finance team presented the general fund operating package last Tuesday afternoon. So for 2023, we are requesting the addition of a collections and technology coordinator to begin mid-year. And this will round out our complement of coordinator positions. It will be the final coordinator to our complement, and we will be able to then have someone designated to oversee our library's IT infrastructure. So that's hardware and software for our public PCs, our digital collections, and our integrated library system, which is our system for accounts and circulation. And it will also be somebody to oversee collection management, which includes acquisitions and cataloging. And then we're also requesting an increase to our library assistant staffing to expand our public service support, expand our programming hours, but also provide sufficient coverage for our new service model, which includes sufficient vacation and sick time coverage, and resume Sunday openings. We haven't gone back to Sunday openings at this point, and this increase will allow us to go back to that. And then the second request, which is the bottom band on this slide, is a request for a contribution of $10,000 towards our library's 2023 strategic planning process. And the library would contribute an additional 10,000 to that. We will use 2023 for revisiting our current plan, undertaking some community engagement, and then creating a new plan that will be intended to sort of inform our work from 2024 and the years following.
Ms. Bloom, can I just ask if those positions, they're 0.5 FTE because they'll only be hired for half the year, or they're intended to be a part-time position going forward?
Great question. It would be to have them begin mid-year in 2023. So it would, as then in 2024, the requests incorporate a full-time cost of that position moving forward. Thanks. So beyond 2023, you can see what's laid out in the following columns. And so in 2024, this includes a manager position, as well as growing that library assistant staffing model to match our anticipated growth and activity. It's also anticipated that our board will support an ambitious strategic plan, which will require adequate staffing to implement. And as I mentioned just now, these requests were built into the district's 5-year financial plan at the outset last year when the library board first approved them. And then in the library board's 2022 review of these requests, some of the timing of implementing these changes were adjusted to reflect growth and to align with when we anticipate this additional growth will be needed. So this has resulted in some variation between what the district charted for the years to come and what the library board approved in July 2022. So in order to address this, the library provision that was established with council earlier this year would be able to be utilized in future to smooth out this transition. And then the other item of note on this chart is the 2024 request to establish some form of expanded service outside of the library's walls. So that capital request at the bottom. I will note that that request was put in as a 2023 request last year, and then the board has decided to move it into 2024 because it's not something that we wish to contemplate and take on in the coming 12 months. The need and timing of this specific request will depend on what is determined in the coming months and years around the expansion of the current library facility. So speaking of the future, we want to assure council that the board continues to be committed to its role as an advocate for the library, as an essential community hub, and as a partner with the district and other agencies to ensure that library service is adequate and effective. We look forward to continuing to collaborate and explore what the library service of the future will look like for Squamish and what possibilities exist in synergies with arts, culture, and heritage. Also, as this is likely the last time the library will be in front of the current council, we would like to extend our appreciation for the supportive relationship that all of you have fostered with us. It has made many wonderful things possible for our library and therefore for our community. So that concludes my presentation, and I am happy to take questions or clarification required.
We've got Councilor Pettengill and then Councilor Stoner.
Start off by saying thank you and the library board for all the work you've done for our community over our term. Just on the mobile modular unit, my recollection was that that was tied in particular to a seniors reading at home program. And I'm just wondering, am I correct in that? And is something happening with that sort of programming? I'm just wondering if you can speak to what program we might or might not get as in 2024.
We currently have a visiting library service that started last year and is underway and continuing, and that's a volunteer-based partnership between volunteers and library patrons to deliver items to their homes. So it's a one-to-one connection, and one of our staff members coordinates and oversees and trains and recruits and maintains that service. So the capital request for a larger scale mobile or modular unit would contemplate outreach services, but it wouldn't, it wasn't or wouldn't be specifically to serve that function only. The board and staff need to do more research and decision making around what exactly that would look like and how it would be best served. And as part of that, the other consideration that's been brought up is the fact that the library serves the Area D, SLRD surrounding area. So geographically, just thinking about ways we can make sure library services are accessible and available to all, especially as Area D is slated to grow significantly in population. So at this point, that's partly why that capital request has been moved further ahead, because we don't have enough of a sense of what it would or should best be at this point to want to start going with it any sooner.
Councillor Stoner?
Thank you, through the chair. Thanks so much for the presentation and all the work that happens at the library. Just a few clarifying points. In terms of the staff level changes, I just want to confirm that those were indeed included in last week's package, because I don't remember seeing them in the service level change.
Through the chair, the requests made by the library board were not shown as service level changes with respect to the district. The rationale is that our understanding is that the request comes from board to council, and this council had approved the original plan for the library's expansion over the next few years, and as such, those changes were viewed as pre-committed. So they are in fact non-discretionary changes rather than service level changes. The approval of the service level change occurred last year when the library board presented its overall plan to council. That answers your question.
That does. Thank you. And then I just want to make sure, Ms. Bloom, you spoke a little bit about kind of this transition and balancing as we move back to in-person servicing versus still maintaining some of the silver linings that we found through COVID in terms of the hybrid and online model. And I just want to make sure that that is what we have proved last year in terms of those staffing changes, is still feeling comfortable based on kind of the breadth of services that we're providing in this kind of more hybrid world.
Can you say that again, please?
Totally. I can be more succinct. No problem. I want to make sure that the service level changes that we approved and the board approved in previous years when we were still going through COVID are reflective of the growing demands and the diversity of services that you're providing as we enter into more of a hybrid model. So we're both providing in-person services as well as maintaining some of the online services. And I just want to make sure that that is still being properly serviced.
Thank you for the clarification. Yes, and that is why, as I referenced, we had put forward our request about this time last year, and then in the time since had looked at and reviewed, the year that had then happened to make sure that we still are on track, because as we move sort of out of that COVID stage, which we were still in about this time last year when we were trying to make our best guess, and now have been able to get back into some more of the traditional in-person services, we did the number crunching and did the calculations to figure out what that staffing complement will look like to be able to comfortably cover our bases in terms of coverage and in terms of not just basic coverage based on current levels, but growing it. And that library assistant position that I referenced various times, that position are people who are those that you encounter at the front service desk. They are people that are doing some of the actual programming for children's and adult programming. So it's sort of a bit of a catch-all phrase for a number of different roles. And we have realized that without enough of a comfortable cushion, we're strained in what we can actually go beyond. And I would also add that learnings from COVID have been the importance of adequate sick coverage, for example, and the importance of coverage, of course, for vacation time and all of that. But really, it's learning and making sure that we're built in such a way that no single staff person would ever feel badly or hesitant about taking the time that they need to rest or be away. And that's been a really significant learning for us, is being able to calculate beyond just the basics of what you need to be open on a day when everything is perfectly aligned.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And then one last question. I think I saw in your presentation that the strategic plan request was 10,000, but in our budget package it says 20. So I just want to make sure that we have alignment there.
Through the chair. Yes, what the library is asking for is a $10,000 contribution, and that's over 2 years. So the total project cost would be $20,000 in total.
Councillor Anderson?
The strategic planning exercise will presumably address the mobile or modular unit scenario. We have from time to time, not only in library services, but other services, discussed the scenarios for integrating Area D of the regional district and various service area models. I wondered whether the services for Area D communities, and we have Britannia North, the site underway now with residential development in the near term, to what extent this will be considered in the strategic plan, and also how or whether Area D communities might be represented in that strategic planning exercise.
Thank you for the question. Our Area D rep, Tony Rainbow, is closely connected with the library, and he and I connect and meet on a regular basis to acknowledge the the projected changes and looking at even the current funding model for library service. As it currently exists, there's a static amount that the SLRD provides to the library, and it's not tied to population. So in the last several years, we've been endeavoring to explore ways that perhaps that legislation be adjusted in recognition of the changing Area D. I will also, though, acknowledge that in the past, this year and last year, an additional amount of operating funding was made available through the SLRD to the library to bump up our funding from about $15,000 a year to $50,000 a year, in acknowledgement that until bylaws and things can be adjusted, there was a recognition of this sort of gap between the funding that we were receiving and perhaps what we could do with more. So as it relates to the mobile library, for example, we've also spoken with the SLRD about, that concept in early days and what that could look like, and is that a useful tool? And then as we start to plan out our strategic planning process, absolutely considering all that we service in terms of areas and populations and communities, including the SLRD. What that will look like in practice, we haven't mapped out just yet, but absolutely that is part of that exploratory stage, and then figuring out how to make sure we're ticking all the boxes in terms of reaching all of those people.
Thank you. You have highlighted staff salary review in your presentation. To what extent have you experienced recruitment issues for either recruiting new staff members or volunteers?
I can speak firsthand to the challenges of recruiting management level positions requiring library degrees. We are still in the recruitment phase for a manager for this year. Now working with a firm to help, because it is a challenge to, as I know the district can relate to, and other employers in town, it can be a challenge to recruit and retain and make it a living situation that people can, align all the things that they want to do and afford to live here as well. So we feel that challenge as well. Haven't had as many challenges in recruitment for positions that have less criteria in terms of qualifications. We're fortunate that a lot of our staff seem to like to stay. So we don't have a lot of turnover in many of our positions, but for the upper level management positions, it's a challenge for sure.
Thank you.
Council French.
Thanks, Mayor. With the notion of opening on Sundays, what hours are you thinking? And just for context, we have 10 to 5 and 10 to 7 as the two of the current scenarios.
So opening on Sundays, doing our best to look back to pre-COVID, if we remember that, we found that the busiest times of day for Sundays was noon to 4. And so that's, at this point, that would be the hours we would be resuming on Sundays based on the request for staffing as presented.
Thank you.
Can you speak a bit more to the integration with arts, culture, and heritage?
As the library board does its work in the committee I mentioned, the functional planning committee, looking at the future growth facilities, what is needed with our library. There are, I guess, natural synergies that exist in the realm with Squamish Arts and the cultural and heritage groups that exist, and we are aware of and have identified some of the gaps that exist currently as they relate to not having a formal archive in our community, not having a community museum, not having many public opportunities for the community to come and learn and interact with those aspects, as well as I know council is aware of some of the pain points for arts, culture, and heritage groups in terms of space. So that is, I think there are some common needs and opportunities that exist between growing the library space and then perhaps imagining the idea of a community hub that could also help meet the needs of agencies and organizations within arts, culture, and heritage.
Thank you. Council, any other questions for Ms. Bloom? Seeing none. I don't think we have a motion, so. Move for receipt of the report by Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for coming today. All right, so some highly skilled engineers and building folks walked into the room during that last presentation, so it must be time for our capital projects budget and our special operating budget. So I'll turn it over to finance. Council also point out that there are many staff that have joined us electronically to answer your questions as well.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council. My name is Roland Russell. I'm Senior Financial Analyst for the District of Squamish, and I look after the budget and financial planning. And with me this morning, I was about to say this afternoon, but that's later. With me this morning is our CFO, Heather Boxford, and I will present and we will take questions with respect to two agenda items, budget-related agenda items. The first being special operating projects, and the second being an update of our capital plan. So our objectives today, there are two resolutions within the report. Or actually, I should say there's one resolution within the report, and then there's an update of a similar resolution from previous, and that is that District of Squamish includes special operating projects presented this morning in the 2023 through 2027 capital plan, and also that capital projects presented this morning in this report be included in the 2023 through 2027 financial plan. And when we get to the capital portion, we will outline changes that have been requested between the meeting that we had in July and this meeting today. So with respect to our overall timeline, it is September 27th, and we are meeting to discuss special operating projects, and there's also a capital recap. This will be the last of our, looking at that, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is number 5, meetings to provide information to council on the 2023 through 2027 financial plan. Subsequent to this, we will come back in November and present a comprehensive package called Tying It All Together, where we will incorporate all of the various items that this council has seen, and they will be presented to the next council. So this is your last opportunity for election to poke and prod into the 2023 through 2027 financial plan. So we're going to look at some of the highlights and special operating projects. Excuse me. What we want to note is there are 3 projects that we refer to specifically within the report and also here that are new additions to our special operating projects. One is Agri-Foods implementation project, which is to help establish the Made in Squamish brand. Another is environmental restoration project, and that is to help us enhance natural drainage assets. And the third is a home energy retrofit assistance plan, and that's to grow the retrofit assist concierge style model. Further to that, there have been some changes to existing special operating projects that we would like to highlight. Working from the bottom up, just to change things up a little bit. Government road realignment, pre-design. That's a operating project which will lead to, in the future, a capital project. And it is looking at both the alignment of the dikes and the alignment, or should I say realignment, of the roads that in that area to ensure that government road alignment is better aligned with the dike requirements and also with our neighbors from Squamish Nation. Another item that we have is the multimodal transportation plan, and that's been updated, and we're asking for a budget increase to manage the change in scope. I believe that there were questions asked around that, and I'm sure that we have staff that will be more than happy to provide answers to council as to what that means, although that's not me. And lastly, um, in the budget last year, and again, this year, we are showing an EAO, which is an environment uh, application. And I'm going to get this wrong, so I'm just going to leave it.
Environmental Assessment Office.
Thank you. Application which has been made by WLNG, and within that we had requested some community support, and what was presented in our original plan envisaged additional RCMP being funded through the special operating project model. And what we've done now is we've revised that and made the change to incorporate the additional RCMP request as part of our service level change. So you saw that request last week, and therefore it is no longer part of the special operating project package. We'd also like to highlight, excuse me, we'd also like to highlight some climate adaptation special projects. There's a list of 5 various projects here that relate to climate adaptation that the district has undertaken. We recognize the importance of managing within the new climate reality. And so we put forward different special operating projects to allow us to be able to do that. On an overall basis, we'd like to say that the long-term focus here that we've presented shows a number of projects being implemented over the years as we move from 23 through 27. The total special operating project budget over that 5-year span is just over $5 million. And the amount that we're looking at for 2023 is just over $2 million. Of that $2.2 million, we should highlight that the last line, district taxes, the tax component of that is $187,500. At this point, I could stop if you would like to ask questions around special operating projects, or I could continue with the remainder of the presentation, which deals with capital.
As long as council sticks to special operating projects, I'll let them ask some questions. Council Race.
Thank you. I'll try. So I just wanted to go back to the police issue. And if I understood you correctly, the possible external funding for a police position then is no longer shown in the budget. My recollection was that there are going to be proposed to be 2 members added for the next year. And are you saying now that both of those will be funded from taxation? Am I correct on that point?
Through the chair, the answer to that is no. I'm not that you are incorrect, but I would like to clarify the appropriate funding mechanism. What we've done is originally, as presented in last year's 22 through 26 financial plan, we showed all of the additional RCMP officers being funded through special operating project. This year, some of the RCMP additions, growing year to year, are being funded directly by taxation. Nonetheless, there is 1 position per year that's being added that is being funded through an external contribution from WLNG, and also 1 additional position per year is being funded through the use of the protective services provision. So we are increasing the number of RCMP. The direct impact on taxation is being smoothed in through the use of the protective services reserve. And there is an expectation that WLNG will contribute to cover the cost of 1 member per year. Does that clarify
Thank you.
the request?
Council Pango.
Yeah, a few questions related to this, and just a comment. I would be great if we could identify wood fiber and Fortis in the actual line items for this. I had to sort of dig to figure out that that's what the EAO topic was about. But some questions about this. Um, does this mean when you say they're funding one member a year, is that one additional member each year, or there's one member for this and that's sort of that one member throughout?
We'll go to Ms. Glenday.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. We're still in conversation with Wood Fiber and Fortis about this issue. And so it's in the budget, similar to a grant provision where we're budgeting for it in the event that the funding comes through. So it's a work in progress right now.
And so not doing it from special projects, that does that then commit us to maintaining these members? Because I think we're expecting there may be a need during the construction phase with all the workers and so on for a larger enforcement base. But after the construction phase, if it happens, the demand for members may go down. So if we're not funding this from special projects, are we still committing to keeping all those extra members past the construction phase of the project?
Through the mayor, I can assure you that every year that we work with the RCMP in terms of their human resources planning and staffing and our commitment to the federal government around our budgeting and our police needs is reviewed. So by funding something during construction, if that is the case, it's not a commitment in perpetuity.
And then just from the report, I wasn't clear if this was intended for mostly managing workers at the site, and because there's talk about equipment and so on as well, which I think was also in the special. And so I want to understand what is the focus of the members and all this equipment. Is it managing the wood fiber workforce, or are we spending a bunch of money for protests? Just where are we allocating these resources?
Go ahead, Ms. Glenday.
Thank you, through the mayor. This is not related to protests. This is related to increased protective services needs as a result of a large industrial organization coming to our town. And as mentioned, this is a provisional budget amount and we're still in discussion.
Okay, thanks. I have a couple other questions about other topics, but I can pass it to someone else now. Okay. In the CC Community Climate Action Plan update for 2024, the amount, well, I recalled us having a discussion about developing some carbon budgeting in the future and reporting, and I wasn't sure the amounts were high enough to contemplate that. So I'm just wondering if we're still thinking about doing that in future years.
Mr. Picketts is on the line if you'd like him to address that question.
Thank you for the question. Could I just get a quick clarification? Is this the tool for budgeting greenhouse gases that we are developing, or a fulsome kind of budget update of our greenhouse gases?
My recollection is that we were looking to, I think it was Victoria had started down the road of carbon budgeting, and I thought we had some discussion about looking to that towards the future. And so that's what I was looking for. So I think it's, when we start to see some of development plans coming before us, having an understanding of the carbon impacts, what is our sort of overall carbon budget, and as we make development and planning choices, what are the impacts of that? So doing the work to understand some of that.
Okay, thank you for the question. Through the chair, we are developing a tool. It's called the GHG Impact Tool. It is nearly complete. We are actually having a workshop where we're testing it next week. And so this is a tool where we will quantify the greenhouse gas implications of different projects. For now, the scope is limited to projects related to transportation and buildings. These are our largest sources of emissions anyways. So this tool will give us an estimation of the GHG implications of different projects, and then we can use it, and it'll actually help us show if we are in line with our projections or not. So it'll be a bit of a test. Does this project align with our emissions reductions goals or not? And our our hope is that this gets incorporated into a large number of RTCs, et cetera, that are going to go to council. So the tool is in development, but it is not yet completed. Thank you.
Mr. Pickett, you are speaking to district projects, not like development projects. You're speaking
Through the
internal. It's
chair.
an internal tool, not one that we'll use to analyze outside projects.
Through the chair, that is correct at this time, but the phase 2 is designed to augment it so that it could be used for larger projects.
Okay, thank you. That's good for now. I just want to make sure we don't forget that. I think carpeting budgeting is going to be important. So maybe it's not for 2023, but something to keep in our longer term planning. So the final thing then, there's a note about neighborhood area planning, and it talks about one plan per year. Given what we've seen though with Garibaldi Estates and some of our other neighborhood plans, I'm just wondering if that's too aggressive an expectation of a new plan per year, or is this a different sort of plan?
Mr.
Sorry,
Buxton?
to what are you referring, Councillor Pettingill?
The heading is SP Neighborhood Area Planning, Community and Land Use Planning, and I think in the notes it talked about an expectation of a one plan per year, and the budget seemed low for that, and the expectation of doing that seemed a bit high given what we've seen.
Yes, it is. I mean, we're budgeting to complete the estates plan next year, and then we'll budget for subsequent plans after then. Yeah, you're right. They're going to take more than a year to do unless we substantially increase resources, which I don't think there's any intent to do that. So yeah, they're going to run on 2 and 3 year cycles at best, and we'll budget accordingly when we get to those plans.
Okay, thank you.
But the 5-year financial plan should reflect that rather than one a year. So either we need to update the description and the money is correct, or the money and the description are wrong. And I guess Councillor Pettingill is wondering which one it is.
Through the chair, we need to update the description.
I've got Councillor Stoner and then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Through the chair, a few questions on the special operating projects. So under the Community Climate Action Plan, there's a few. I'm curious if staff can provide an update first on the retrofit assist. I see that we're planning on expanding that project, and I noticed in our later strategic plan update that we're also going to include potentially providing some financial assistance to support that transition. So I just want to make sure that staff can provide a bit of a rationale as to the success of that project to date and why we're putting more money into it.
Through the chair. So far we have 41 people registered in the Retrofit Assist heat pump pilot project. So each of these retrofits to a heat pump system from a carbon-based system will reduce household emissions by over 6 tons per year. So this represents a major win in our building emissions reduction targets. The budget you speak of does support the Retrofit Assist program, as well as some top-ups for incentives that provincial and federal governments offer. One really big advantage of this program is that we're getting significant external funding to augment it. So we're actually getting probably about 2 to 1 external dollars per our dollars. And we're also enjoying some pretty big efficiencies of scale as we've been working with New Westminster and Whistler on this. And we're planning to for Roslyn to join in next year. So we believe it's good value. It is a fair bit of resources and cost, but research shows quite clearly that additional external support is really necessary to get people over the hump to retrofit their homes. Just information and just incentives on their own are not sufficient. So this has been proven to be one of the very few models that work. So we're feeling strongly that it is a worthwhile use of resources, and our building emissions reduction targets are difficult and bold, so they require this sort of intervention. Thank you.
That's fantastic that we have 41 people signed up, and thank you for the update. My other question was around the budget line item for the community carbon marketplace. And this is one that has been in our budget since the start of this term, and we've seen a little shift on it. And so I just want to check in again, as I think we did last year, on the progress and if it really makes sense to keep going down this road or if it's time to let this project go.
Through the chair, yeah, we apologize that we have not been able to show some substantial updates on this. We do in fact have our project is complete. The interface that we've created is ready to go. We've just been really stalled out in that we've been unable to find a community partner to be kind of our first prototype to offer the offsets. So we are confident we'll figure that out in 2022. So I guess one thing I can say is that although there hasn't been much progress, staff hasn't put a lot of resources into this in the last year. We're just kind of stuck at this one stage that hopefully we will get over soon. And once this is in place, it shouldn't be much resources going forward. It'll be an interface where people can we showcase and provide a way to exchange credits in a manner that is much more robust and has a trail, so it has a much higher amount of legitimacy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that update as well. One last question around, we're currently doing some work on the parking strategy, updating the parking strategy. But I didn't see any money in the special operations project budget for implementation of those forthcoming recommendations. And I'm just wondering if staff can speak to when the study will be completed and how we might intend to address the implementation of that project.
Thank you, through the chair. The study on utilization and recommendations on how to proceed with the parking program should be done before the end of the year. So we don't have any data on how the issue has changed in the last 4 years. We have spoken to our consultant. The cost to institute something next year is significant. It's not a cost-free, and those numbers came in late in the budgeting process, and it was going to be a very significant add into the process. There's going to need to be a
Can you give us a scope? What's very significant?
Over $400,000 in terms of service level changes in machinery and equipment. So that was consequential at that point in time. It's going to require a fair amount of public engagement. So in my estimation, if we were going to include something, it would be a placeholder for that engagement next year. These sorts of projects are invariably sensitive in the community and difficult to get done. So if we wanted to put something in next year, my recommendation would be a consultation and information placeholder. My guess is probably in the 30,000 range to give communications and the relevant departments some resources to work with. But we would then have to fit that into the communications work plan for next year, because it's not a small piece of work.
Okay, having some sense of scope is helpful, but I also just want to make sure that we're going to get a suite of potential implementation strategies and not just the paid parking component. Are there because there's other tools that we can use to manage parking, especially downtown. And so I'm just curious what I would have expected a scope in that range, or a range in that scope, not just a be all end all solution.
The consultant, as part of this project, was tasked with implementing a paid parking program. So the consultant's report will focus in on that. It doesn't mean we can't look at other options, but the consultant's report was directed to how to do that particular piece of work.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. With respect to the proposed government road realignment pre-design study project, I wonder if staff may be able to clarify or confirm whether the road realignment scenario is related to the dike realignment or the CHM Indian Reserve boundary, or both, and whether we might receive, or the public in future, a project description clarifying this question, the rationale for the road realignment. Thank you, or the road realignment scenario, if you like.
Through the chair. That project is related to a historical encroachment of government road on the CHM Reserve. It's not directly related to the dike project.
Thank you. I noted in the project description that might be misinterpreted or not fully, but I wonder whether that might be adjusted in future for the public as well as for council.
Through the chair, certainly. And the project was raised to the forefront through the dike master plan. So that's why there is some interrelation between the projects, but the encroachment on reserve land has existed for many years, and so therefore is unrelated to the dike project.
Thank you, Mr. Rolston. My next question is regarding the multimodal transportation plan updating. Can staff speak briefly to the proposed scope change that's identified in our project description?
Through the chair, that the term scope change is probably not accurate. I think really it should be described more accurately as a detailed scoping exercise that was undertaken in 2022 as we're preparing the terms of reference for the project, and realizing that we had probably underfunded that project in order to achieve all the objectives that we were hoping for out of the project.
Thank you. My third question concerns the environmental restoration project. And in a recent presentation from our engineering department on the stormwater management plan, what is in fact the former east branch of the Squamish River, today we call it the Wilson Crescent and Carson Place sloughs, were highlighted as important to that plan and for its drainage function. So my question in relation to the environmental restoration project is that the project description refers only to the Mamquam reunion channels, which are distinct. And I wondered if staff might be able to speak to the, if you like, the geographic scope of this undertaking, whether all of these channels feeding into the upper Mamquam line channel might be considered.
So through the chair, I can respond to that. I sort of put this project together. The answer is we'll work with a relevant nonprofit. Sorry, I can't see Councillor Anderson. We'll work with a relevant nonprofit to design a project that gets us the maximum environmental benefit. So could it extend to the areas that Councillor Anderson has suggested? Yes, it could. It's unlimited in scope and scale, other than by the budget number, which is coming from the environmental reserve.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. I'll just finish by advising that there are 3 nonprofit community organizations with extensive involvement over a long period of time with these channels, and they are Squamish Streamkeepers, Squamish River Watershed Society, and Squamish Environment Society, each contributing different types of involvement and expertise to a potential project plan. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair. I may come back if there's time later.
Councillor Rice, and then Councillor French. Then I'll put you on the list.
Thank you. And so I take it when I first asked the first question, I was sort of focused on just the last comments, but this is a discussion on the special projects generally. And the other question, first of all, is are we going to discuss the handout about reserves? Is that a separate discussion, or is that part of this discussion?
Excuse me. I think it would probably be better to include discussion with respect to reserves with the capital budget discussion, since that's where the reserves are primarily, those are the projects the reserves are primarily associated with.
Thank you. So I'll leave those questions for a minute. But with respect to special projects, and I know there's other questions with respect to the Chikai-Cheakamus confluent sediment removal. But I understand what that is. my question was on the funding source, which shows a $200,000 cost coming from taxation. And so thinking about reserves a little bit with that, I'm wondering if there were not other sources that were considered or available for that besides taxation, because it seemed like kind of a one-off project, or at least once every several years. I think the last time that was done was after there was a significant flow of debris down the Chikai about 2010. And we obtained grant funding a couple of years later, finally, to have that removed before it let go in a catastrophic fashion. So I'm wondering, that was through Emergency Management BC, if I recall correctly. And so I'm wondering about this. I guess it's like all of these rivers, there is sort of a continual flow of debris down to some extent or other. And is this something that we should consider as sort of an operating expense, like a lot of our other recurring operating expenses, or is this more in the one-off, infrequent, depending on what happens type of scenario, and possibly consider alternate funding modes?
Through the chair, I can speak to the financing aspects. I'll leave our engineering group to speak to the more technical aspects of how frequent this type of thing should be done. With respect to the financing, this project, and I'm going to draw a slight blank, but I believe it's for 2024. These are the types of projects that historically have been funded through the Community Works Fund. The Community Works Fund, to the best of our knowledge today, will cease to exist after 2023. So because we are not aware today of an alternative that may be made available to us from senior levels of government, the only direct replacement we have access to is taxation. Or we could use another reserve, but we don't really have a reserve that is designated for us to use to pay for the operating portions of major projects. Okay, that's what we were using the Community Works Fund for. So without a replacement for Community Works Fund, we don't have a specific reserve that is readily identifiable. So what we've done is identify it as tax. Certainly, we will work with senior levels of government and see what they can do with respect to gas tax. I don't see the funding source disappearing, but we're not sure at this point how they anticipate sharing some of that revenue with municipal governments. Sorry, I hope
Ms.
that answered your
Boxer.
question.
Thank you through the chair. And just to further on Mr. Russell's commentary, this type of project doesn't actually meet the requirements for capital. So that is one other the reasons why it can't be funded by a capital reserve. This does not preclude us from seeking grants. It doesn't preclude us from, if the Community Work Fund comes in as a 2.0, we'd certainly utilize that. But for in respect of adding it to the budget currently for the 2024 financial or budget year, taxation is where we flagged it for the moment.
Councilor Rice, can I build on your question? Mr. Ralston, the experts' reports indicate that this confluence is actually part of mitigating residual risk in that area, and that creating more room for debris would actually reduce some of that residual risk for events that might come through the barrier. And so I'm wondering why, as part of building the barrier, the developer is also not responsible for doing some of that mitigation work at this confluence, and why they wouldn't contribute to this project.
Through the chair, that is correct. That debris buildup at the confluence is related to the overall risk, particularly near the confluence, which then affects group risk across the Chikai Fan. At this stage, there's no certainty as to the timing or whether that project goes ahead. And so therefore, we have assumed that the district would be responsible for funding this interim work until there is greater certainty on the rezoning for the Chikai Fan development. At this stage, there's so much debris built up near the confluence that we feel something needs to be done in the short term. And so therefore we think the district should fund sort of these interim works.
Councillor Reyes?
Well, one last question on this. If the Community Works Fund is uncertain after 2023, was any thought given to doing this work in 2023 while we have the money available? And I tend to agree with you. I understand the geology of that area and the issues around that. We went through that back in 2010. But is it possible, is it conceivable to speed that up, to take advantage of these funds, to add a little bit of certainty, at least for this go round?
Through the chair, the challenge with that is with respect to DFO permitting, and that process is quite lengthy. And so we will need to secure permits both from Department of Fisheries and Oceans and also through the Water Sustainability Act. And like I say, those processes can be quite lengthy. And so to assume that we'd be able to expend those funds in 2023 would probably be optimistic, given that we haven't really started any of the actual design or permitting processes for that project as of yet.
Councillor French and then Councillor Harvard. And then
Thank you. And still with Chikai Cheakamus confluent sediment removal, I now want to explore the other end of all of this. That sediment has real value and is in demand. So I'm curious to know where will the sediment go? Will it be used by the District of Squamish? Is it our resource? Could you shed some light on that?
Through the chair, based on previous sediment removal projects at the confluence of the Chikai and Cheakamus, that previous material was provided to the Squamish Nation for use in filling the Cheakamus Reserve and resolving some of the flooding issues that have been experienced there. There's also some significant cost savings to the district because it's a very short haul, basically just across the river. We haven't determined the source of where that fill will go at this stage, but I think at this point it's probably a safe assumption that if the Squamish Nation is interested in that fill, that it would probably go to the Cheakamus Reserve.
Okay, great. And unrelated, I'm interested to learn a little bit more about the LiDAR acquisition. Is this a single piece of equipment that's being purchased? Is it a subscription with ongoing commitment? Could we get a little more on that?
Through the chair, this isn't my project, but I'm sort of peripherally aware of it. But my understanding is that we would hire a contractor who owns all of the specialized equipment and that they would fly over the district, completing the LiDAR survey, and that we would purchase the data for them and then integrate that into our GIS system.
Excellent. That's clear. Thank you.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. Mr. Rolston, you might want to come back, but sorry, so some of my questions have been answered through the process here, but there's a few holes. So this project at the confluence of the Chikai, and I accept your assessment of needing permitting and sort of some pre-design. Is that work fit inside the normal workflow, or is this something that needs to be budgeted for as well? Like, are we setting ourselves up to actually be able to execute that in that time frame?
Through the chair, sorry, just a clarification. Is the question as to whether we have budgeted at the correct time based in order to be able to spend the money in 2024?
I was thinking more about I suppose that's always a good question as well. But what I was trying to get at is the planning and permitting piece. Does that require its own budget, or does that fit into someone's normal workflow? And just, are we setting ourselves up to be ready to execute that and spend that money in that time frame?
That's a really good question. Probably the way that we'll handle this project is to begin planning and permitting in 2023. And I'm assuming that we would actually use the annual flood protection budget to initiate that. These would be relatively small expenses to kind of get the project off the ground, starting with the design and permitting. So I assume that that's what we would do, and to begin the work probably partway through next year in order to be set up to actually spend the money and remove the sediment in 2024.
Thank you. The government road realignment work, and I appreciate the description that you provided. I think just that line item could use another descriptor, because government road is our longest road, and I think if as others, I dug in and found where it was, but just to help with that, so it's just a titling thing. And similarly with the environmental restoration project, I mean, that's quite a broad description and can maybe be focused in just to help the public consume this, because that's one of our next, one of the next pieces is to communicate this out. I have a question around the neighborhood area planning, and Mr. Buxton touched on this, but I wonder about there's the timing and the funding, and I feel like both are in the description. There's a disconnect kind of in all three steps. So is that 30K number just seems low, regardless of however many projects we get done over that time, just given the time and energy I see these things take. So can we speak to that 30,000 number, which has been scheduled for 23, 24, and 25? Is that appropriate?
I'm actually going to get Mr. Velanishkas, if he's on the line, to speak to this in terms of the detailed budget allocation across time.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Through, excuse me, through the chair. So the 30,000 annual budget is essentially a base amount that we need to initiate the project. Now, in past years, sometimes that has been enough, but I think more often than not, we have to increase that amount once we know the kind of task in front of us and how much that will cost. So that's the reason why we've been keeping it at 30,000. But yes, it's quite likely that when we get to the project and we know what needs to be done, that amount will change. We don't expect it to be a significant change, but yeah, it's a base amount.
Okay, thank you. On the parking piece, I'd like to see something around a placeholder around whatever the subsequent next step might be from this report. And I know it's this upcoming report, so I know it's a challenge to sort of scope all the way through as far as implementation goes, but I'm just a little concerned that we're going to see a report or council's going to see a report in December before the end of the year, say, and any further actions are going to wait a whole nother calendar year. So yeah, and I think I heard earlier that $30,000 might be something to a reasonable number to put towards this. Is that correct, Mr. Buxton?
Sorry, through the chair. That's a bit of a guess on my part. I think I hear, if I'm hearing council correctly, they'd like an implementation item in the budget for next year. I'd like to take that away with a couple of other staff, including communications, and figure out what is going to be a meaningful amount to get some work done next year. So I threw that 30 out as a sort of a bit of a guess. So I'd like to sort of refine that guess when we come back. But if I'm hearing council correctly, that's what they would like, or that's what I'm hearing.
Thank you. That seems reasonable to me. Would staff like a motion to this effect, or is this conversation sort of in more of a workshop? Motion on the floor. So I'd move that staff bring back a funding recommendation for next steps on the parking implementation for consideration budget 2023.
Is there a seconder? seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any comments on this resolution? Councillor Ford and Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. There's a project underway. We'll see a report will come to council in before the end of the year, according to staff, on the parking, downtown parking, paid parking, and I think it's appropriate to have some funds set aside for whatever potential next steps would be from that when council reviews that and takes a direction. So there's not a lag time of 12 months or more before any action gets taken from that report.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. I was going to put forward a similar motion that was a bit more directive. So happy to have staff come back with their thoughts on what that dollar value might be in terms of correct implementation. I would like staff to also consider using the municipal off-street parking facilities reserve to fund that work. I think that's the most appropriate funding source from my perspective. Thank you.
Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, I'll support this as well. I think we want to, there's community demand and we want to take action on this. It is my recollection though that we were going to look beyond just paid parking. And so I'm not sure how to articulate this at this point, and maybe leave it to my colleagues to chew on for a bit, but I do think I am interested in seeing things beyond just paid parking and a paid parking plan. As part of our assessment on how we move forward and when we move forward with different pieces of it, if there are different pieces. So that's a piece I'm just chewing with, but happy to support the current motion for now.
Councillor French.
Thank you. Speaking in favor of the motion, I see this as an investment. This would be money that we would be spending to help us generate future revenue. I support the motion. Thanks.
Councillor Race and Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I'll support this as well. I think this is one step, but not the only step in considering parking issues in the downtown area. Focusing just on paid parking, like meters and so forth, certainly that's one possible solution. But parking solutions to me have, over the years, have ranged from there's no need for it to we have to build a big building. And right now our parking reserve, when you look at a few $100,000 in there, it's like we're trying to build a $20 million structure, one parking stall at a time, and it's going to take us practically forever trying to get money like that to build something like that. And so I think if we are going to consider this, I think we have to kind of broaden the view. I mean, this is one component, and this will come forward with a plan. But to stop there, I think would be a mistake, because I don't think that's going to be the only answer. And we're going to have to consider some possibilities or opportunities to have something else put in place to relieve the parking downtown.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I'm also speaking in favor of the motion. I think that the suite of initiatives is a suite, and it will include what I'll call miscellaneous projects or initiatives. And just two I'll highlight. We have district programming, such as the Moto Car Share that we're involved in, that utilizing specific parking stalls. There may be that kind of alignment which could create more flexibility for public use of parking stalls. The other one is right across the road from here, is a small project, but it is in this miscellaneous category of simply a line painting to adjust to the fact that there is no longer an active driveway at the intersection in front of the library. And this is a small change that opens up two parking spots. But my main interest is to acknowledge that there's going to be a suite of solutions, including a miscellaneous category. Thank you.
I'll support this motion because I won't be at the table after this election, but I think it's vague and I don't think it goes far enough. But you should have something in the budget next year. I don't think that parking should just go towards creating more parking spot. I think parking fees should go towards transit. And this council has committed to expanding our transit service, doubling the transit service in the next 5 years. And that's all on taxation unless you figure out a way to pay for it. And so parking fees is one of the best and direct connections between how to fund transit. I would say that downtown parking would require a lot of engagement. I don't think that's where we start. I think we should be engaging the developer on the oceanfront to put paid parking there from the get-go, at the park, on the streets, where nothing exists today, but the expectation going forward is that if you go down there, you're paying for parking. I think there should be paid parking at Darrell Bay. I think there should be paid parking at the Adventure Center gravel parking lot. And we should also explore potentially the Smoke Bluffs Park parking lot. So tourists are paying for parking before residents start paying for parking. And to me, that's less engagement, it's less infrastructure, and it could be well within the scope of something that could be implemented early in the term rather than engagement, which will be contentious. No one wants to pay for parking. So I'm not quite sure why we'd ask a lot of people. The answer will be no. But if we commit to putting it towards transit and moving forward in a stepwise way that focuses on visitors paying a nominal fee, then we build up our ability to expand transit for our citizens a lot faster. So I don't think the motion really gets us where we need to go. And I'll leave that up to my colleagues at the table. But those would be my thoughts, is that you bring it back with a plan that is not paid parking downtown, but focuses on our tourism assets first and a brand new neighborhood where we create new habits right from the get-go. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Glenday.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. Seeking clarification from council following this motion that council would like this brought forward netting out something so that the tax increase is not beyond what we've already presented, or finding funding that's not taxation, but otherwise not increasing the current revenue increase proposal.
We have one councillor expressing reserve funds. Councillor Herford?
I think that reserve fund would be a good place for this, not knowing the dollar amount that's to come back. So yes, exploring other funding for this would definitely be not a taxation ask if possible.
Are you done your questions? I had a question about the Parks and Recreation Master Plan review for 2023, 2024, and what's in the scope of that, because we did a lot of engagement about Brennan Park in 2018 about what the building needed to be. We did a lot of engagement about the Brennan Park Lands Master Plan. We still have things to implement, I think, from the original Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And I don't know that I really want to spend $120,000 to find out that we need a second ice rink, a bigger pool, another gym, a wellness center, a daycare, a skate park. So the only piece of that I see is the neighborhood level recreation. And so I'm just trying to figure out why we're going to spend $120,000 on something that we already know, unless there's something we really feel we don't know. And I'm just wondering if someone can answer that question. Who's the best person? Is Mr. Lepage or Jonas? Who wants to tackle it?
I'm happy to start it, since I think it was my department that suggested the idea of reviewing the master plan. So as you said, Mayor, the way that the scoping started for this project was to address the needs of neighborhood level recreational facilities. But the intent is to build on the information we have for Brennan Park, so we're not planning to revisit that. We're going to build on it. And at this point, it's hard to say where the scope is going to go. This is a 2024 project. I think there may be a typo. Initially, we thought bringing it up in 2023, but now it's proposed for 2024-25. So that we're going to spend the next year essentially scoping it out before we come back to council with for a scoping discussion.
Mr. Valnescu, can I just ask, like, we have a real estate and facilities master plan that we're really going to struggle to figure out how to pay for. And so why would we introduce more scope on the capital side? Is that to try and capture it through CACs?
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
we really can't add more to our own list at this point.
You're exactly right. This is to capitalize on any opportunities that we might that might present themselves through development, and that's why, you know, the main scope was on neighborhood level, so that where development is happening, like oceanfront, waterfront landing, other areas in town where we have larger developments, that we could secure some of those facilities for the community. But we need to know what we're looking for.
Okay, I just think we have to scope it very carefully and set expectations with the community very carefully. And I'm not sure it's as big as we think it is. Given that I think the next council will be working very hard on implementing our plan for Brennan Park. So I just don't want to go backwards or add more to our list of capital projects. I wanted to ask a question around the How Sound Community Forum. It has $4,000 in 1 year, but I believe the motion we just passed a few weeks ago indicated we'd be hosting in 2025. And there's no money in that year. So I wonder if staff could just take that away and double check about where we need to include that. And I know Ms. McJanet is bringing back a report before the end of the term on our support for the Howe Sound Biosphere Reserve Initiative. And so there may be additional funds to put towards this item.
Yeah, just quickly on that, I noticed that it was such a small thing. I wasn't going to mention it, but the $4,000 I think is a historic number. And in past years, when we have had an assessment, we've based it on population. And our population rose faster, I think, than all the other populations in our area. So I was going to suggest nudging that up a little bit. I mean, it's a small thing, but it's conceivable to me that instead of 4, it could be 6, for example, going forward. And we'll just see how it works, reassess it annually. But that's how the breakdown has usually been determined. In addition to that, in 2025, there will be the costs of hosting the forum.
I wondered too if finance could speak to how we're moving our social procurement work forward in this next budget cycle. And if there's any specific focus. I saw the P cards in 1 year. That's certainly an element of it. There's other pieces like vendor engagement and that sort of thing. And I just wondered how that might be rolling out.
Through you, Mayor, we don't have anything specifically in the budget currently for vendor engagement. Certainly P cards is on our TTP planning. And then in terms of just continuing the work that we currently are doing with social procurement in terms of the vendor listing, the pre-approved listing as well.
One of the things that's coming forward to us at Committee of the Whole is the Ideas Committee, their plan around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the important reasons I wanted us to get involved in social procurement is that we have a chance to use our dollars for good in the community. And so when you think about vendor engagement, it's about making sure that our local businesses understand what our procurement documents will look like, what we're looking for under social and environmental values. And also it gives us a chance to engage Indigenous-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, female-owned businesses, social enterprises, as well as just the contractors we're using regularly throughout the corridor to bring them up to speed and help them understand how they can be more competitive by responding to the social and environmental values that we're indicating. So I feel like if we're not putting this into our budget somewhere, it will get lost because we're busy. But I think it's the strategic work of helping our community see the true value from social procurement is getting them ready to bid on our smaller work. Or if we break contracts into smaller pieces, that they're ready to bid on that work. Is there a place that we could see this happening?
Through the chair, certainly if it's council's will to add something to the budget, we can certainly take a look. But currently there isn't a project specifically assessing the value or the cost of doing that work.
So maybe I'll put forward that staff scope a vendor engagement project in 2023 and add funds to the 2024 budget, funded ideally through surplus or provision, but could be tax. Seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, so let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll move on to capital projects and then people can do all their comments at the end if they'd like. So we'll come back at 10:08. Welcome back to our special business meeting on Tuesday, September 27th. We're still on item 3.2, but now we're moving on to the capital projects budget workshop. And council, then we've got the motions that we'll put on the floor at the end. So save all your comments about special operating projects and capital projects to the end. So let's do questions about capital projects. Then we'll put motions on the floor. And you can add your comments there. Okay, so questions first. But first, I'll hand it over to Mr. Russell for a presentation on the capital projects budget.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council. Part 2 of the September 27, 2023 through 2027 financial plan package. Now we're going to talk about capital plan highlights. I think. Okay, here we are. So a couple of things. All of this information, or most of this information, was presented to council at the end of July. So council had an opportunity to look at a number of things that were being brought forward. So on this first slide, I'm kind of looking at that going, this highlights a number of projects that were new additions to the overall capital plan. And it does make mention of specific commentary at the bottom that we were using CACs to fund parks and recreation projects, and we'll speak to that more specifically in a later slide. So these are some of the projects that we're referring to with respect to new capital project additions, and these are the highlights. These projects are being funded through the use of CACs. All these projects are either associated directly with Brenham Park or affiliated with Parks and Trails. So there's been a demand for increased parks facilities, both I guess from the Parks and Trails perspective, actually the land aspect and the physical facility aspect. And the district has attempted to include a number of projects to address those subjects. And we are proposing the use of community amenity contributions to fund those. And I'm looking at this, and unfortunately my notes aren't telling me how much CACs we're using to do that, but I think it's in the range of $3 million approximately.
I think your previous slide said 2.7, didn't it? For the Brenham Park area?
That was for the Brenham Park improvements, but
Okay.
I think that probably doesn't include the no-name road. So these are some of the changes, major existing projects that for which there will be changes. There's been a delay in the Public Works facility, which you're aware of. I won't say there's delay in Tantalus Fire Hall, just simply a better understanding of the timing of that project. We received the grant, which is always a good news story for Brenham Park revitalization. And so this allows us to better align the overall project's timing with the funding and our formal understanding at this point that we actually have the grant.
Mr. Russell, that revitalization grant was $11.3 million.
That is true. And the portion of the project that was being changed is $6 million. So it's not, this does not reflect the whole project. We're just simply saying that we're moving a portion of that project into the future years. And that also represents the fact that we now know we have the grant and therefore we can prepare better timing for when things will actually be accomplished. The other items there are ones that, again, council is aware of: wastewater treatment plant upgrade, sea dike, delays in the sea dike related to permitting, etc., and the new water reservoir. And that's simply a timing issue when we need the reservoir and when it can be completed. Our staff have done a lot of work in trying to contain the overall capital plan and ensure that what is being presented to council is deliverable. So there's a number of things which are shown here, whereby we've changed the timing of projects, delayed projects, attempted to coordinate various projects with one another to ensure the appropriate flow with those facilities. For example, Public Works site and wastewater treatment plant, because of their close proximity. And these were all highlighted to council previously, and want to reiterate that staff have turned over a lot of rocks, let's say, to try to find ways to better align our overall capital plan with both our funding and our resource capacity so that we can get things done in a timely manner. So on an overall basis, this is the total amount of money that we're spending on the capital plan, $244 million. Projected over the next 5 years. So that's a lot of money. That's a lot of projects and a lot of facilities, et cetera, being built. And it also outlines our major sources of funding. And so you can see that there's a lot of borrowing, there's a lot of reserve use, and there's a lot of grants being applied. There's also significant use of development cost charges, which is where we are relying on funding that we receive from our developers to allow us to continue building physical assets. So with that, I have reached the end of the capital update presentation. I guess the last item that I should mention, just put a bow on all this, is last week, our protective services group, but it's not, it's our fire services group, came and presented to council a request to have additional funding identified within the 2023 capital plan to allow for the purchase of a fire apparatus. And so that item has been updated within this plan. That's the only significant change that's been made from what council saw in July of 2022. And at this point, I'm going to open the capital project discussion to council or any questions you may have.
Councillor Herford, then Councillor French.
Thank you. I'll start with some quite general questions. In a few of these items that are sort of reoccurring things, for instance, transit stop improvements, they're steady at $100,000 over time until 2027, and then there's a bump. And I'm just wondering, are we getting, with the cost of implementing projects such as that, are we getting less and less over time and there's a correction later, or is this a scope of the project changing at that later date? Because I see trends in a few areas like that where there's the funds are sort of a static number until a little bit later, and they step up, and they don't. I'm just wondering if how staff approaches in the general sense those sort of cost escalations versus the amount of work we have to achieve, not just how much we need to spend on it, because they're should be related, but they're not always.
So I will offer a bit of an explanation around that. We try to set out a standardized amount of funding that will be available for our managers to spend on these projects. And then that allows them to align their scope of work to the amount of money that's available. We do recognize that over time there are inflationary pressures, and so the amount of money is going to have to change from time to time. So I think what you're seeing is a number that's being extended out for the next, say, 2-3 years. And then our engineering group has come back to us and suggested that to maintain the level of service that we currently have been providing, that those costs would have to increase. And so rather than trying to create a slope, we're viewing it more as a stair-step type model for funding.
Councillor French.
Thank you. And I'm looking for a bit of reassurance from our staff that we learned from the Eagle Wind experience with the pickleball courts. With money in the budget for pickleball work, I'm worried that we could end up with the same scenario over again at Brennan Park. We currently have housing units under construction across the street from the current tennis courts where pickleball is taking place. So will staff just reassure us that we're not going to make the same mistake with noise around pickleball courts in the future?
Yeah, council, I can answer this question. Staff did a walkthrough at Brennan Park to look at potential location, considering distance from housing, to consider noise issues. And we have potential options, and we are planning to engage with the Pickleball Association to discuss potential location that we identified towards before the end of 2022 to really nail down where the courts will be relocated.
Thank you for that reassurance.
Councillor Race, then Councillor Anderson, and Councillor Pettingill.
Thank you. My question was around reserves, and we have the additional material, which I found helpful, although it didn't seem to cover everything. And so, with reserves generally, and maybe I'm speaking for the next council as opposed to this council, my recollection of the long-term financial plan, and I confess I haven't looked at it for a couple of years now, was that it set targets for some reserves and contributions and where it comes from. And so when I look at this, some of these reserves, I wonder, first of all, what's the source of the funding? And secondly, where are we with the goals? And in effect, it kind of leaves you then with hopefully monies that might be available for something else besides just whatever the reserve is for. So that's just a comment. The second question is with respect to the program that is expiring, Community Works Fund Reserve, $4.3 million. But maybe staff could clarify. I gather that's not money we have in the bank because it might disappear next year, at the end of next year. Is that a stream that we could anticipate until the end of 23 and then nothing happens? Or could staff clarify that, please?
Through the chair. Actually, the money related to Community Works Fund is money in the bank. This is a unconditional grant. We receive the money upfront from the province, from the feds through the province. So technically what that's saying is we have $4 million in the bank and we have until the end of 2023 to spend it. So we've got a lot of projects on the go in current year and in 2023 to allow us to manage that. Through the chair, the information that we received last year when the government stated that they were planning to wrap this up was if you do not spend it, there may be a requirement to repay. So they were kind of being a bit open-ended. They weren't hard, use it or lose it, but let's be cautious and suggest that it will be better for us to spend the money than to have a batch left over in the case that they do decide to ask for it back. So our goal would be to use all the money prior to the program expiring.
I don't think it's meant to be a reserve. Ms. Boxer?
Thank you, through the chair. There's been quite a bit of discussion on the GFOA BC forum on this exact topic, and it's a resounding spend it or we will likely have to pay it back. So that is the line that staff are taking.
And so then I take it that those monies that are listed here are committed through the coming year in some fashion.
Yes, they are.
Thank you. My last question is with respect to CACs, which aren't listed as a reserve, but seem to be sort of treated like a reserve. And years ago, and I just frankly have lost track of it, but years ago we had a commitment to spend a certain portion of CACs received for affordable housing issues, another portion for, I think, active transportation and so forth. And right now we have some very large numbers in the budget funded by CACs over the next couple of years. And I'm just wondering how much we have. And I guess I'm assuming these budget numbers are anticipating, in some cases, the receipt of CACs if the project goes ahead. Or do we have all that money that's in the 5-year plan now?
Through the chair. With respect to CACs, I guess I can answer that in 2 stages. The projects that we showed on the earlier slide, those projects, the total amount that we're anticipating spending on those projects is covered by our existing, the existing amount in the CAC reserve. Okay, and that would be the general community amenities contribution pot, as opposed to specific portions that are aligned to affordable housing or otherwise. Okay, and it is anticipated that we will have continuing development and we will build up more money will flow into CACs over time. As you know, as development progresses. So the total amount that's shown in this plan over 5 years is $8 million. Do we have $8 million in the bank today? No, but we anticipate that we have $4.5+ million in the bank today, and we will continue to receive funding in the order of, roughly $1 million a year, which has been the historic trend over the last couple of years.
Councillor Anderson.
I'd like to pose a question to Planning Director Valeniskis regarding the proposed Parks and Recreation Master Plan review. And my question is limited to it is a practical scheduling question. It seems to me, I gather that the Planning Department has done some careful review and thinking about a potential scoping for this project. I'm wondering if it's possible that either for this or the incoming next council, a presentation could be scheduled from the Planning Department on its deliberations for the scoping of this review. Or, at the very least, whether an information report for council's information could be compiled in time for our budget deliberations. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. We are planning to bring this item outside of budget deliberations in 2023 with the incoming council for discussion. So we will bring it outside of the budget deliberations, and the project is not intended to start next year. So we have a bit of time to do that if we need to ground truth the numbers that we've got in the budget right now.
Thank you.
Councillor Pettengill and Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, on the turf field repairs or rehabilitation, my recollection was, and there's some questions and comments about we would like additional turf fields, but I thought originally the pitch was sort of there's about $2 million. They last 15 to 20 years and very low maintenance. But what seems to be what we seem to be seeing is there's significant high maintenance costs over and above a regular field maintenance. It's $700,000 in this budget. I think we're only about 5 or 6 years in. So, I mean, I think it makes sense probably to keep the fields we have, but as we move forward having these discussions, can we get, or do we know, what is the true cost of a field? And is that compatible with some of the multi-use things we want to do? Like, are we seeing these high costs because we're trying to have multi-use fields? Or I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around how much these things really cost.
To council, just the maintenance costs you're looking for, or?
Well, and maybe this isn't the place to have the discussion. Maybe it's to put aside and for this information to come back later. But it would be helpful having these conversations with the community to understand what is the actual cost of a turf field, because the discussions still seem to be these things are quite affordable, low maintenance over the long term. But what I'm seeing in the capital plan is it looks actually quite expensive to me. And so are these good for multi-use fields? And what is the sort of true cost over the lifetime of one of these fields? Would be really helpful for me to understand.
Okay. Yes, staff can look into this and report back to council.
Okay.
Do you mean in relation to a natural grass field? Like you're trying to compare the cost of a turf field and its ongoing maintenance versus a grass field?
Yeah, and the intended uses in the context of the intended uses we have for our fields. My other question is around the pickleball, and I'm not sure if it's a question to staff or council, and it's a little bit of a, I guess, wondering if we've done a gut check or why are we here. Initially we had a request, there was going to be grant money, and so the total project cost to convert some courts was, I think, $60,000, a lot of it from grants. Turned out the grant money wasn't there, so we funded that. We were now having to move it, so there'll be costs with that, and we have $320,000 coming out of CACs. So I'm just wondering how we have assessed that, given that scope creep and all the other competing interests, that level of investment at this time still makes sense. And from the budget survey we saw last week, it seemed like there was more support for tennis court investment, which we also have. But I guess I'm just wondering what we've done recently to assess that the pickleball deserves this magnitude of investment, because total investment, when we consider those other costs, it's getting up to close to $500,000 now.
Who wants to take that one? Go ahead, Mr. Buxton.
I'm not sure that we've experienced scope creep. What we experienced was the project that had unanticipated outcomes. In terms of whether or not the amount that we're proposing is appropriate, that's the amount it's going to take to build the new courts. I can't get asphalt cheaper and I can't get fencing and nets cheaper. So if we want to, say, solve the issue that we have, that's the cost. In terms of its appropriateness, I might leave that for council to deliberate.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. I'll follow on with my pickleball question. With the relocation of the courts, does the budget include returning the Eaglewind courts to tennis courts, or are we maintaining them as is? What's the vision there?
Sorry, I'll go ahead, Francis.
Yeah. The $320,000 is strictly for the pickleball courts. For the tennis court, we don't have any funds planned for the rehabilitation of the courts at this time. Thoughts are, if ever the pickleball relocation project comes under budget, we would use some of the funds available for the tennis court rehab. But like just mentioned, we expect the need to use the whole $320,000 for the pickleball relocation project.
Okay, so is it still anticipated that people would be able to play pickleball at the Eaglewind courts?
Well, technically, they would be relocated and they would only be left at tennis courts. But since we're not repainting the lines as we don't have budget, I assume like the pickleball lines or courts will still show there. So potentially people could still play. But if we communicate through the Pickleball Association that now we're expecting pickleball games to take place at the new location, this is how we'll try to control or avoid people going to use the old courts, and manage also any issues with noise there, as it doesn't respect, I believe, the distance from housing.
Okay, so there's also a line item over 3 years to spend $900,000 on tennis court rehabilitation and expansion. What is the phased vision of that? I'm suspecting we're not doing all of the tennis courts, but how does, I guess maybe a better way to frame that is why would we not consider the repainting of the Eaglewind courts under that budget?
This could be discussed internally with staff to prioritize which court to rehabilitate and establish a priority list. I can take this over and discuss this further with staff.
Mr. Buxton.
Sorry, Francis. I just have a bit more background.
Yeah, go ahead.
In this sort of transition between Francis and myself. My understanding is there are tennis courts at a park along the boulevard somewhere. Those are the first rehab. Then the courts at Brennan Park. We've prioritized those, I think, because we've got surfacing issues and surfacing failures at that. So there's sort of a playability issue at those. That's why they're prioritized over Eaglewind. And I don't think we expect pickleball to, if we build the new courts, I don't think we expect pickleball to continue at Eaglewind. So that facility would essentially be idle until we do repurpose it.
Well, I think that's Councillor Stoner's point, is we're going to end up with an idle asset that's actually in good condition while we rehab courts that are in worse conditions. So why wouldn't we make sure that asset's not sitting idle.
We certainly could. It would, I mean, it costs around 50,000 to repaint and re-net the Eagle Wind facility. So it's going to cost something similar to that to get it back to tennis. So if you wanted to increase that budget accordingly, we do get to a point somewhere along this line, however, that there's only so many projects that we can manage in one year, and we're getting close to that. So funding would give us the opportunity, whether or not we can actually physically pull that work off and have 3 projects going with respect to courts. That's maybe something we do need to take back.
Yeah, I think Mayor Elliott helped kind of clarify my point, which is why we have a fairly new clean asset that would then be sitting idle, and it's a much cheaper transition at $50,000 than to resurface an entire tennis court. So something for me to consider as we talk about potential motions coming forward. My other question was, in June, we had folks come from the Squamish Skateboard Association to council as a delegation, and I'm just wondering if staff can report back on where those conversations have gotten to. They did have some requests around the Valley Cliff tennis court, which they're currently using as a makeshift skate park, and so I'm curious where that falls with respect to our prioritization list.
And I can just add, we also had a request to cover the downtown skate park and expand the skate park at Brennan Park. So this group has been very active in terms of promoting skateboarding in the community.
Yes, true, Council. I can answer this. For now, staff were brainstorming on what could be possible to do, and also with our capacity as also financially, we didn't plan for covered structure for a skate park. So we're doing a bit of brainstorming and looking at the potential options. And we're planning to engage with the Squamish Skateboard Association once we're done brainstorming and to propose some options. As right now, due to capacity and also it wasn't part of our initial plans for this year. We're looking at what we can do right now, and I believe also updates on this will be provided during the facility master plan presentation later on today. But this is where we're at right now with the skate park. But the objective is to engage with the Squamish Skateboard Association before the end of the year with a plan.
Councillor Pettengill?
So just in relation to the last couple of topics around skateboarding and pickleball and so on, rather than assign in the budget right now the full $320,000 plus possibly some more to rehabilitate Eagle Wind and so on, do we have the ability to put in the budget a smaller amount? So say $200,000 towards pickleball, $120,000 towards skateboarding or whatever it may be, with the expectation that to get these projects completed, some of these associations may need to come to the table with the rest of the money. So we sort of set aside a commitment in that amount, but then there's an expectation of sort of our partners in the community to come forward with the rest. I guess to staff, is that something that's reasonable or possible to do, or do we have to, if we're going to fund this, it has to be full funding for a project we can complete?
With respect to the pickleball, given the issues that we've had with the current court, we need to make a commitment or not to move on that project. If we go with a project that's partially funded through contributions from the association, we very likely run the risk that it's not happening next year, because we're asking them to find X percent of that $320,000 in the next 3 months, which is, it's not impossible, but it means the project is likely not going to happen. Can't happen next year.
Do we have a policy on how we spend CACs, how we prioritize that general amenities fund?
Through the chair, we're working on. There. How's that? Oh.
I thought that might be our answer. I guess, and that's related to my second question, is that some might argue that we should keep all these CACs together and spend them on the bigger ticket items that we know we have in the real estate and facilities master plan around Brennan Park. But we can see there's quite a large spend over the next 5 years of the CACs we've collected. And so how does staff weigh that sort of using these on many but smaller amenities versus saving it for a second ice sheet or expanding the pool?
Through the mayor, with respect to some of these larger project components that you mentioned, second ice sheet or expansion of the pool, these are multi-million dollar projects, probably well north of 15 million each. CACs are not going to, we're not going to receive sufficient CACs to allow CACs to be the sole funding source for the district's component of these projects. We are going to have to rely on other levels of government's funding, i.e. grants, to allow us to bridge that gap, or, excuse me, or we're going to have to invest substantial amounts of borrowing capacity to allow us to complete these. So it's not that we don't consider CACs, we do. And we believe that CACs will form a significant component of the district's contribution to the overall project cost. But we can take the $3 million in CACs we currently have and build a half dozen projects that the community wants right now. And so we think that that's prudent use of these funds, and use future accumulations of CACs to allow us to provide additional funding contributions towards larger scale projects, which is what we are doing in the current financial plan. So you can see that we have a second grant application associated with Brennan Park for somewhere in the neighborhood of $16 million. And we're anticipating that we will be able to accumulate $3 to $4 million of CACs over the next 2 to 3 years, and use that funding to as the district share or contribution toward that grant. And so we think that that on a longer term basis is a better use of CACs. We're going to need to accumulate a larger pot and then use that portion, maybe in $3 to $5 million chunks, as our contribution towards matching financing that we would then attempt to receive from other levels of government. I hope that answers your question.
Is there any part of the Brennan Park playground and splash pad that could also be used for improving the skate park at Brennan Park, or do those need to be two very different capital projects? Mr. Lepage?
Yes, through council. Believe this will be in the, I don't have the answer to this question right now, but I believe it's part of master plan presentation plan for this afternoon. So if it's not covered during this presentation, I will get the answer back to council shortly.
We just don't have another budget meeting, so I'm just wondering if there's, Mr. Bragg, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, unfortunately, he's not.
Oh, he's sitting here in council chambers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Lepage. The answer is yes, we can. There is so much work to do at Brennan Park that what we're trying to do is lump the small works in an area that gives us the best return. And that's a very good example. You know, if we're laying concrete for a splash pad, then why can't we do the concrete for a skate park? So we're not there yet. We're scoping and we're planning that, but we're very well aware of combining projects where we can. And utilizing the user groups and the information that we've got in front of us to actually do that. So it's a very good question. And yes, we are looking at combining where we can.
Thank you. And I just have a question for Mr. Wilson about Honeck Park and the diking there. We've seen that permitting has taken much, much longer than we had thought. But our costs are also escalating with each year that goes by. And I'm just wondering what we're doing or what can be done to mitigate those cost escalations. I know when we're doing a building, we do value engineering, but is there any way in which we're trying to rethink or re-strategize the Honeck Park capital project, given that we're now at $11 million and our grant was originally for $4 million. So it's a long way off what we thought it was going to be originally.
Through the chair, the design has been largely complete on Honeck Park for well over a year at this stage. So we're continuing on with the plan that we have, which we feel is basically the base requirements in order to achieve the flood protection and permitting requirements of the project. So there's not a lot we can do in terms of redesign to sort of value engineer that at this stage. So we're not looking to make any changes on this particular project, but we'll certainly incorporate any learnings that we've had on this on future projects.
Thank you very much. Okay, we need to wrap up because we have a committee of the whole that I've already eaten 10 minutes into. So last quick question, and then we'll put motions on the floor.
Yeah, and I apologize, I'm fixated on this pickleball. The new proposal, is that for the same amount of court space or a larger amount of court space than Eagle Wind?
It's for a larger amount. I think it's eight courts in the new facility.
It's for 8 courts.
Okay, and so just trying to understand incremental costs, you know, what's the differential if we kept it the same size, or, you know, have we or can we look at, I know we moved away from this before, but given the amount of investment and the other demands, reconfiguring this as more multi-use, so definitely some pickleball lines, but also tennis lines, maybe a basketball net, or so that these, for the amount of money spending, there's multiple uses. I'm just wondering, like, does that double the cost, or, you know, that's a 10% incremental cost? I'm just wondering if you can speak to that.
No, because you just designed a hypothetical facility. So no, I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
All right. So there's 2 motions, or is it 1 motion? The one in our agenda says just the special operating projects presented today, but then you also had that statement on your slide with the capital.
The reason that well, special operating is a separate motion, clearly. And we're suggesting that if there are any changes that council wishes to present with respect to capital, then they would need to make a motion to that effect also, either via resolution or by individual motions.
I'm looking for someone to move a motion. Councillor Stoner.
I will start with a proposed motion to amend the capital budget as follows. That we remove the tennis court rehabilitation line item from the budget and add $50,000 to the pickleball line item to allow for repainting and re-netting of the Eagle Wind courts to tennis courts. Yeah. And I have a subsequent motion to follow up with it that'll explain in my rationale as to why I'm removing it entirely. The follow-on motion that I was also going to put, so maybe we just do them all as 3 motions. And that we bring back a policy on how to fairly balance the spending of CACs across protected services, parks, and recreation and cultural assets. So those would be my 3 motions. And if it's seconded, I'll speak to it.
Seconded by Councillor French. Comments? Go ahead. Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, so I appreciate that this is a significant move on the tennis component, but to me, as I read through the Brennan Park lands and fields master plan, the tennis courts, pickleball courts, skate park, all of these amenities all fall under the same categorization of medium term. And so to me, putting $900,000 into the capital budget for one of those items and not having a fulsome understanding of how we're going to address the rest of them at this point doesn't seem entirely fair to me. So I think we need to do a little bit more work on our policy around how we spend the CACs. The other components in terms of our CAC spending in the 2023 budget, I think are fair. They're either higher up on the priority list in our master planning, or they're correcting an issue that we created ourselves with respect to the pickleball courts. So I think that that's just a sunk cost that we have to own because we allocated pickleball courts to somewhere that's not super appropriate. And so I think investing the $50,000 to repainting and renetting the Eagle Wind court so that we have more up-to-date facility there for tennis, as well as pursuing the new location for the pickleball courts is good value at this time.
Councillor Pettengill and then Councillor French.
Just a clarifying question. I heard 2 motions, I think, but you also mentioned 3. So I'm just wondering if you can clarify what the 3 are.
Yeah, so it's removing the tennis court rehabilitation line item, adding 50,000 to the pickleball line item, and then bringing back policy on how we allocate CACs.
You can speak.
Well, I'm going to test an amendment, and that we amend the pickleball amount to facilitate courts the same size as Eagle Wind, not an increase in court size.
That is very complicated. But is there a seconder for that? No. So we're back to the main motion. Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. And speaking in favor of the motion, one of the things that this does that I think is really important in this scenario is will discourage in the future the use of the Eagle Wind's courts for pickleball. If we just walk away and leave the lines, I'm very worried that people who are not involved in the pickleball organization yet are players will bring their own nets, and we'll simply have the problem recreated all over again. So by returning those courts to a use that focuses on something other than pickleball will be acceptable for the residents that have been so inconvenienced since those courts were created. Thank you.
Councillor Reyes.
Thank you. And this is just on the motion to increase the amount allotted for pickleball. That's just for clarification. That's the only motion that we have actually in front of us right now.
I think Councillor
Put
Stoner
them
put all
together
of
as a
them.
block.
They're all together.
Sorry, is that necessary? Could we
It
deal
was-
with them separately?
You would have to amend the motion.
Okay, well, I'll move an amendment that we just deal with the pickleball, adding $50,000 to the pickleball. So the amendment would be to increase the line item for pickleball to $350,000 to allow for rehabilitation of the Eagle Wind courts to tennis courts.
And that money would come from the tennis rehabilitation line item?
It could, yes.
I think that's where Councillor Stoner had pulled the money from originally. So does that part of her motion stand?
That part can stand.
I'm just going to talk to the corporate officer. We had 3 items. Council Race has moved an amendment that just focuses on one. Is that the easiest way to do it, or should we move to split the motion?
I think you should move to split the motion and also clarify if removing the tennis item contemplates all the other rehabilitative work on the other tennis courts that were planned in that amount.
So do you want to move to split the motions?
Yeah, that's my preference. I'll move to split the motions. Thank you.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Anderson. So on the first motion, which is about taking $50,000 from the tennis rehabilitation line item and converting the Eagle Win pickleball courts back to tennis as part of moving the pickleball to Brennan Park. Councillor
Thank
Race.
you. So I think that makes good sense. And I agree with other councillors' sentiments on this, that I don't want to leave Eagle Win just as a sort of an idle asset. If we are moving pickleball out of Eagle Wind, which I support, then I think we also want to reconvert Eagle Wind back to tennis. It is an asset available for that, and I think that is a good spending of money.
If people are going to say something in opposite, then I will allow you to speak. If you're all going to say the same thing as Councillor Race, I'm going to call the question. So if you're going to oppose the motion, put your hand up. Otherwise, I'm calling the question. Okay, I'll call the question on moving money into the Eagle Win Court. Any opposed? Motion carries. So then the second motion
is that we remove the tennis court rehabilitation line item from the 2023 budget.
Is there a seconder? No, we've already. How does this work, Robin? I've split. It's been seconded. The whole thing's been seconded, so I've
That's
just
right.
split them.
Yep, you just split them so you vote. It's moved and seconded, then split, then vote.
All right. So commenting on the removing the entire line item from the budget for tennis rehabilitation. Councillor Race.
Thank you. And I'm not supporting this. The effect of the first motion is to reduce the amount by $50,000, presumably in the first year. And so I still think there's value to this program to start off with in the first year, reassess at the end of the first year. This program is spent, it's predicted over several years. So if we have to adjust it, I think we can do that. But I think it is also a need in the community for the tennis courts and the rehabilitation of the tennis courts. And so I would not want that program to change in the first year, except for the reduction of $50,000.
I'm also not going to support this motion. We have assets in the community, and once we build them, we should maintain them unless we plan to pull them out. So I don't think that is a wise use of, or it's not good asset management. And so I think that council can always revisit this line item going forward as the rehabilitation program continues. But I think it's an important piece of our recreational asset management going forward. Any further comments? Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, just looking at our plan, our 5-year plan, I will not support this because I agree this is something that I think we should stick with our full amount for the tennis court rehabilitation for this year and probably reduce it in a subsequent year. But as part of the broader plan, which is the next resolution, I think that's where we evaluate how we adjust future years. And there is room in 2024 and 2025 to address the tennis court rehabilitation if we need to.
Any other comments that differ from that? I'll call the question. Any opposed? Councillors Race, Herford, Pettengill, Mayor Elliott, Councillor Anderson opposed. Motion fails. And so on the third item, which is to bring back
a policy on how to fairly balance the spending of CACs across protective services, parks, recreation, and cultural assets.
Any comments on this one? Councillor Race.
I think that is a good idea. Thinking of the past history of dealing with CACs, it's kind of changed from time to time to meet pressing needs. And I think that's something we could update and have council, the next council certainly review the priorities around that.
I offer a friendly amendment that you include the specific. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to amend it to say the spending of the CAC's general reserve fund.
The seconder is okay with that. Councilor Herford.
Thank you. I think this this addresses an important piece of the puzzle as we contemplate how to spend these funds. And not only does the motion highlight sort of the different areas, but there's subsections inside those areas that need to be prioritized, which is sort of what was the trigger for this motion in my mind around the tennis court allocation to the skate park, to the other things that do fall even under the same umbrella of recreation. So I think this is an important piece I'm happy to support.
All right, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. So those are the changes. Did your motion say off the top to approve the capital plan with the following changes?
It did not.
No. Okay. So any further changes to the capital plan? All right. So motion to move the capital plan for 2023 to 2027 with the changes noted by council on September 27th. Moved by Councilor Vert, second by Councilor Race. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. On the special operating plan, are there any changes you'd like to make to the plan? Councilor Pettengill.
I just wanted to ask staff for some clarification. I think we've heard, and I supported the change to provide some funding to take action on the outcome of the parking study, or at least a placeholder. But we also had a fair bit of commentary that there might need to be other solutions other than just paid parking. And so I'm wondering what sort of resolution we might need or staff might find useful to make sure we're not focused solely on paid parking, but we're considering some of these other things over the next year.
Mr. Buxton.
In terms of implementing, providing some form of project around implementation of a parking program of some form next year, I think that's relatively straightforward. We can bring back some direction on that or some work on that. In terms of the suite of the other options, that's a little bit more ambiguous for me in terms of that may be in our transit budget, that may be in the active transportation budget, it may be in other budgets. So in terms of bringing back something on a paid parking program, I'm relatively clear. I can give you something there, and the rest, in terms of the suite of options, that's work that in some ways we're already engaged in. So I think we can put that work on paid parking into that context, but I'm not sure that we need to do a review of the suite of other options. Of course, in some ways they're already underway.
So I think you have to give a specific, if you're going to put a motion on the floor, it has to be very specific to a project that can be actionable and it has a funding source.
Okay, well, actually, I think Mr. Buxton may have gotten at what I'm wanting or what I'd like to see. So at this point, I'm less concerned about the specific budget items for other things in the suite, but more an understanding when the paid parking or whatever it is comes to us, some understanding of how this fits in with the suite of other things we're doing at the very least. Is that something that we will get?
So that could be part of your report to council when you bring back the parking utilization and the paid parking strategy, is how parking fits into the suite of options to focus on community climate action or mode share or increasing transit, right? Like it comes in a context, not just we're looking at paid parking.
Yeah, we can certainly, when we bring back a paid parking direction, we can certainly place that in the context of the larger suite of, let's say, transportation demand management initiatives that we're looking at.
So that addresses that issue for me. Thanks. The other thing I wanted to check on, we had some questions and comments around the neighborhood planning. Garibaldi Estates has required more engagement than I think we originally thought. And I just want to clarify that the $30,000 in the budget is sufficient for that project in particular over the next year.
Mr. Villaniskis? Are you still there?
Yes. So the budget amounts that we have to finish that project are accurate at this point. We know what we have left to do. We're currently working on producing some renderings of the area, but it's not really the engagement that's eating up the budget. It's the other activities like the archaeological assessment, traffic analysis, production of renderings, things like that.
Okay, I just want to check with finance staff. So we're getting clarity on the House Sound Community Forum line items and updating those, where we've already moved a motion on the procurement piece. We've already moved a motion related to parking. Was there any other clarity that we identified that we needed by the next pulling it all together meeting?
Thank you. Excuse me. Through the chair, there was just a few different details around descriptions that we need to have updated as well.
All right, so council, we don't need motions on those things. It would be anything in addition to the changes we've already talked about or the clarity we've asked for. Mr. Russell, did I miss something?
Excuse me. I may add that you've asked for a review of CAC policy. Are you identifying a specific dollar amount you'd like to have associated with that? Or do you just want us to go figure out what that's going to cost and bring back a project?
The latter.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to put I would be estimating it for a dollar value.
All right, anything else before we vote on special operating projects? Councillor Stoner and then Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I just want to clarify back to the parking strategy. I think that there were some really good suggestions around expanding the scope of investigating paid parking outside of the downtown core. So I want to ask staff that the current strategy is just focused on the downtown core. And if we were to look outside of that, that would require a budget increase. Is that correct?
No. The study itself looks at the downtown core and will provide some recommendations like that. Those principles can likely be extrapolated to any other area that you so choose. So no, I don't think so.
Can I move on to Councillor Anderson? Councillor Anderson?
Thank you. I'd like to just briefly speak in support of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan review as proposed in the present presentation. The last or present Parks and Recreation Master Plan approved in 2012 includes is rather diverse in its scope. It includes facilities and programs not addressed in the Real Estate and Facilities Master Plan and not addressed in the Brennan Park Master Plan. It includes private and community nonprofit facilities and programs that are not owned and operated by the district. I think these are important complements that one of the functions of that 2012 plan was to map out, and we should be keeping them in mind as we review community-wide our facilities and program planning. And if not, we should decide and discuss this. So I appreciate Mr. Villaniska's clarification that, or suggestion that a discussion of the scope should and can be held in the new year as the program or review is still being planned. Finally, this would be version 3 of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Versions 1 and 2 were entirely different in their approach, and version 3 may be well again. So I'm just speaking in support of the present line item of Parks and Recreation Master Plan review. Thank you.
All right, any other changes to the special operating project budget? All right, would someone like to move the special operating budget as presented aside from the changes mentioned by council on September 27th. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Race. Any further comments? Keep them short, please. I've now taken 35 minutes away from committee of the whole. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And for all the staff who helped us work through these two items today. Staff, any points of clarification before we leave this? Because this is your last chance to ask this council. Okay. All right. So we'll take motion to terminate, moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll just take 5 minutes to get, no. Oh, open committee of the whole.